With Lillian joining us, our family has finally been cleansed of low things that crept to our table, the mother-in-law announced proudly to 400 guests. She smiled at her new, perfect white daughter-in-law while staring straight at the black woman in the sapphire dress. Little did she know that the same black woman, Amahle Foster, secretly owned the entire catering and lighting company running the wedding. One quiet snap later, every chef, server, and bottle of champagne walked out, leaving the elite starving in the dark. Instant karma served ice cold. If you love stories where racist in-laws get publicly destroyed, stay until the end. Drop in the comments which country you're watching from and smash subscribe for more revenge stories like this. Amahle Foster had built an empire from nothing but grit, intelligence, and the refusal to ever bow. Tonight, dressed in a floor-length sapphire gown that caught every shard of light in the chandeliers, she walked into the Clark family estate ready to play the perfect wife, even if it killed her pride one insult at a time. The secluded mansion glowed like a jewel box under the summer night, yet the moment the wrought iron gates closed behind their car, the air turned thick and suffocating. White roses lined the driveway in perfect rows, but their scent felt forced, almost chemical. Security guards in crisp black suits watched every guest with the cold efficiency of prison wardens. Amahle felt the familiar weight settle on her chest the instant the tires crunched over the gravel. She had been inside this house 100 times, yet it never failed to remind her that she was tolerated, never welcomed. Weston Clark, her husband of 5 years, squeezed her hand as they stepped out of the car. His palm was damp. He offered her the same tight smile he always wore when they entered his family's world. "Just get through tonight," he whispered. "It's Ethan's day." Ethan was Weston's younger brother, the groom. Amahle nodded once, swallowing the bitterness that rose in her throat. They had barely crossed the marble foyer when Josephine Clark appeared at the top of the grand staircase. Weston's mother wore pearls the size of quail eggs in a silver gown that screamed old money. Her eyes, pale blue and sharp as winter glass, locked on Amahle immediately. Josephine descended slowly, the picture of aristocratic grace, then stopped 3 steps above them. Without a greeting, she lifted a lace handkerchief to her nose, as though something foul had drifted in on the breeze. "Amahle, dear," she said, voice dripping with honeyed venom, "that shade of blue is certainly bold. It suits people who are used to manual labor far more than it suits guests, don't you think?" Amahle felt the words strike like a slap, but her face remained smooth. She had practiced that mask for years. Weston's grip tightened until it hurt. "Mother," he said quietly, the warning soft and useless, "Amahle looks beautiful." Josephine's smile never reached her eyes. "Of course she does." She turned away, already dismissing them, and glided toward a cluster of wealthy friends who greeted her with air kisses. Weston pulled Amahle deeper into the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers blazed overhead, reflecting off gold-rimmed plates and endless flutes of champagne. The string quartet played Vivaldi, but the music felt brittle, as if even the violins were afraid to play too loudly. Guests in designer gowns and tuxedos turned to stare as the couple passed. Some smiles were polite, others openly curious, a few outright hostile. Amahle kept her chin high and her steps measured. She had learned long ago that weakness only fed them. They were shown to their table, tucked near the service corridor, far from the elevated head table where the bride and groom would sit with Josephine and her husband, Reginald Clark, Weston's silent, stone-faced father. Amahle noticed something else as waitstaff moved through the crowd with silver trays. Every server pouring wine or clearing plates at the main tables was black or brown. Every face emerging from the kitchen doors with fresh dishes was white. The pattern repeated itself again and again until her stomach twisted. She leaned toward Weston. "Do you see how they've arranged the staff?" He frowned, glanced around, then shook his head. "It's a big event. They probably just assigned shifts." Amahle pressed her lips together and said nothing more. She had recognized the company logo on the staff uniforms immediately. The Grandeur, her company. She had personally approved the contract months ago when every other reputable agency in the state refused the Clark family's impossible demands and microscopic timeline. Out of loyalty to Weston, she had signed it herself, then handed full execution to her most trusted operations manager. vowing not to interfere. Now she wished she had read every addendum. Half an hour later, the heat and the whispers became too much. Amahle excused herself to find a quieter place to breathe. She slipped through a side door marked "Staff Only" and followed a dimly lit corridor toward the restrooms. Voices echoed ahead, one of them familiar and furious. "I don't care what Mrs. Clark thinks is aesthetically correct," her operations manager Danielle snapped. "These requests are discriminatory, and I'm not forcing my people to—" "You'll do exactly as you're paid to do," a nasal male voice interrupted. Mrs. Clark was very specific. Amahle stepped into the small office alcove. Danielle stood with her arms crossed, glaring at the Clark family's estate manager. A thick folder lay open on the desk between them. Amahle's eyes fell on a single sheet clipped to the top, bright red ink screaming across the page. Special instructions. Approved by Mrs. Josephine Clark. All floor servers at main tables must be people of color. White staff restricted to kitchen and back of house only. Purpose: to recreate the authentic atmosphere of traditional upper-class service. Amahle's blood turned to ice. She reached out and lifted the page before either person noticed her. Danielle spun around, eyes widening. "Ms. Foster, I didn't know you were—" Amahle didn't answer. She stared at the words until they burned into her mind. Josephine hadn't simply wanted to humiliate her daughter-in-law. She wanted to stage a living tableau of servitude, a plantation dinner theater for 400 guests in the 21st century, and she had used Amahle's own company to do it. Her fingers trembled, but only for a second. Then the trembling stopped, replaced by something colder and far more dangerous. She looked up at Danielle and spoke with quiet steel. "Get me a full copy of every addendum," she added after I signed, "and start preparing Plan B." Danielle nodded once, understanding perfectly. Amahle folded the red ink page and slipped it into her clutch. When she stepped back into the glittering ballroom moments later, her smile was serene, her stride unbroken. The puppet banquet had just found its new puppeteer. Amahle returned to the ballroom with fire racing through her veins, but no one could see it. Her face stayed calm, her steps slow and graceful, as though nothing had happened. She slid into the chair beside Weston and placed in the shadowy corner where the light barely reached. The table number read 27, the farthest from the bride and groom anyone could be without sitting in the garden. Weston leaned close. "Everything okay?" She gave him a small nod and reached for her phone under the tablecloth. Her thumbs moved quickly. "Prepare Plan B. Full documentation ready. Wait for my signal." The message went to Danielle. The reply came back in seconds. "Understood." The first course arrived. A young server no older than 20, wearing the crisp black and white uniform of the Grandeur, placed a plate in front of Amahle. The girl's name tag read, "Kendra Catering Staff." Her hands shook slightly as she set down the salad. Amahle recognized the look in her eyes. Exhaustion mixed with the fear of making a mistake in front of these people. Kendra offered a quick, nervous smile before hurrying away. Across the room, Josephine circulated like a queen holding court. Every few minutes she passed their table on purpose. She never spoke directly to Amahle again, but she made sure her voice carried. "Bring more of the 98 Bordeaux to table 3, she ordered a passing server loudly. "And tell them to move faster. These people act like they have never served a proper family before." She laughed with the guests nearby, and they laughed with her. Amahle watched every movement. She noticed how Josephine's elbow always seemed to bump a tray or a shoulder when a black server walked past. She noticed how the woman's smile grew wider each time someone winced. Weston kept his eyes on his plate. He pushed lettuce around with his fork, pretending not to hear. Amahle's anger toward her mother-in-law was familiar, but the disappointment toward her husband felt fresh and sharp. She had married him believing he would stand with her one day. Tonight proved the day had not yet come. Josephine swept by again. This time she stopped right behind Kendra, who was pouring wine for an elderly couple 2 tables away. Without warning, Josephine stepped sideways and drove her elbow hard into the girl's side. Kendra stumbled. The crystal decanter tilted, and a ribbon of deep red wine splashed across the white tablecloth and onto Josephine's silver gown. The room went quiet for a heartbeat. Josephine gasped theatrically and pressed a hand to her chest. "Oh my goodness! Look what you've done!" Kendra's face drained of color. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I didn't see." You didn't see? Josephine's voice rose to a shriek that silenced every conversation. You clumsy girl. Do you know how much this dress costs? Heads turned. Phones lifted discreetly. Amahle felt her pulse pound in her ears. Josephine snapped her fingers twice, the way someone calls a dog. When Kendra froze, Josephine pointed a manicured finger straight at Amahle. You should ask her how to clean up properly, she announced to the entire section of tables. You two look alike after all. I'm sure you speak the same language. A few guests chuckled nervously. Most looked away, embarrassed but unwilling to intervene. Kendra's eyes filled with tears. She clutched the empty decanter to her chest as if it could protect her. Amahle's chair scraped against the marble floor as she started to rise, but Weston's hand clamped around her wrist. Not now, he whispered urgently. Please, Amahle, not here. She stared at him. His face was pale, his mouth tight with fear of his mother's wrath. In that moment, something inside Amahle shifted and hardened. She pulled her wrist free, not roughly, but with absolute certainty. Josephine was still speaking. Honestly, it's impossible to find decent help these days. Thank heavens the agency finally listened to me and sent the right kind. Amahle sat back down slowly. She picked up her napkin, folded it once, and placed it beside her plate. Then she took her phone again and typed a single word to Danielle. Soon. Weston exhaled in relief, believing the storm had passed. He reached for her hand, but she moved it away to lift her water glass. The cold liquid did nothing to cool the rage burning in her chest. Kendra returned with a towel and cleaning spray, apologizing over and over while Josephine stood witheringly watched. Amahle met the girl's eyes across the tables and gave her the tiniest nod. Kendra's shoulders straightened just a fraction. The silent play continued. Josephine floated from table to table, basking in sympathy for her ruined dress. Weston drank 3 glasses of wine in quick succession. Amahle sat perfectly still, her spine straight, her gaze steady. She was no longer counting insults. She was counting minutes. The lights dimmed to a warm gold as the enormous 6-tier wedding cake rolled in on a silver cart. Ethan Clark, Weston's younger brother and tonight's groom, stood beside his new wife, Lillian Whitmore, a porcelain-skinned heiress whose family name opened every door Josephine ever wanted. The couple held the pearl-handled knife together, smiled for the cameras and cut the first slice while the crowd applauded politely. Amahle watched from her dark corner and felt nothing but cold clarity. Her fingers still gripped the stem of her water glass so tightly that the crystal threatened to crack. Weston sat beside her, shoulders rounded, staring at the tablecloth as though it might save him. She turned her head slowly and looked at him. Really looked. 5 years ago, she had believed his gentle eyes and soft promises. She had told herself that love could change a man, that one day he would choose her over his mother's poison. Tonight, she finally accepted the truth. Weston was not weak because he was kind. He was weak because he was afraid, and fear had made him a coward. Memories flooded her without mercy. The nights she had worked until dawn to build the Grandeur, while pregnant with their first child they never had. The doctor visits she attended alone because Weston couldn't get away from family obligations. The way Josephine smiled at every miscarriage, as though fate itself agreed with her. Amahle had carried every burden silently, believing endurance was strength. Tonight she understood that silence had only fed the monster. On stage, Josephine took the microphone from the master of ceremonies. Her silver gown had been changed for a pristine white one, as if the wine incident had never happened. She beamed at Lillian with grandmotherly pride. I want to say a few words about our beautiful bride, Josephine began, voice syrupy sweet. Lillian comes from one of the finest families in the country, a lineage unbroken for centuries, pure and proud. She has never had to lift a finger for anything in her life, and yet she carries herself with such grace. The audience murmured approval. Lillian blushed prettily and squeezed Ethan's hand. Josephine continued for 10 full minutes, listing boarding schools, charity boards, and vacation homes in the Hamptons. Every sentence was a knife aimed straight at Amahle's heart. When Josephine finally paused, the room waited in breathless anticipation for the grand finish. She turned, eyes glittering, and looked directly at table 27. With Lillian joining us, Josephine said, voice ringing clear, Our family has finally been cleansed. At last, our noble blood will be preserved, safe from the low things that tried to creep their way to our table. A stunned silence fell. Then a few nervous titters rose from the older guests. Someone coughed. No one dared speak against her. Amahle felt every stare land on her like hot coals. Her knuckles turned white around the glass. The sound of her own heartbeat filled her ears. Weston shrank lower in his seat. He reached for her free hand under the table, but she moved it away before he touched her, as if he already knew she would reject him. Josephine lifted her champagne flute in a triumphant toast to purity, tradition, and the future of the Clark name. Glasses rose all around. Amahle did not move. Across the room, near the service door, Danielle, her operations manager, caught her eye. Danielle gave a small, almost invisible nod, waiting for the signal. Amahle set her water glass down with deliberate care. She smoothed the sapphire fabric over her knees, then lifted 2 fingers off the tablecloth in a quick, sharp motion. Danielle's eyes widened for a fraction of a second. She turned and disappeared through the staff entrance. On stage, Josephine was still basking in applause. She did not see the quiet storm moving into position. Amahle rose from her chair. The sound of the legs scraping the floor cut through the noise like a blade. Hundreds of heads turned. Weston looked up, panic flashing across his face. "Amahle," he whispered, "please sit down." She ignored him completely. Her heels clicked once, twice, as she began the long walk toward the stage. Conversations died in her wake. The string quartet faltered and stopped. Josephine noticed the movement and frowned. "Is there a problem, dear?" she called out, still smiling for the crowd. Amahle did not answer yet. She kept walking, spine straight, chin high, every step measured and unstoppable. The room held its breath. When she reached the edge of the dance floor, she paused and looked straight at her mother-in-law. The false vows were over. It was time for the truth. The main course arrived on large silver platters, carried by the same tired servers who had endured the entire evening. The scent of roasted beef and rosemary filled the air, but Amahle tasted nothing. She had not touched her food since the salad. Josephine, still glowing from her speech, left the head table and walked straight toward the service line. Her eyes locked on Kendra, the young student who had spilled the wine earlier. Josephine lifted one finger and beckoned the girl over with a smile that looked sweet to anyone who did not know her. Kendra hesitated, then obeyed. She approached with a new platter balanced carefully on her palm. When she was close enough, Josephine reached out as if to steady the dish. Instead, she jerked her arm sideways. The entire platter flipped. Hot slices of beef and scalding gravy poured down the front of Kendra's uniform and splashed across her arms. Kendra cried out in pain and stumbled backward. The platter clattered to the floor. Gravy dripped from her apron like blood. Josephine threw her head back and screamed loud enough for the entire ballroom to hear. "Help! This savage just attacked me!" she shrieked, clutching her throat theatrically. "She threw food at me on purpose!" Gasps rose from every table. Phones appeared instantly. Kendra shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "No, ma'am, I didn't. You filthy little beast!" Josephine shouted. "Who let you near me? Manager, get this animal out of here and take that one with her." She pointed a trembling finger directly at Amahle. "Same breed, same manners. Get them both out of my sight." The room froze. 400 guests stared in shocked silence. Weston half rose from his chair, face white. "Mother, stop!" Reginald Clark, seated at the head table, turned and gave his son one cold, warning glare. Weston sank back down as though an invisible hand had pushed him. Amahle stood. Not in anger that made her shake. She stood in perfect calm, the kind that comes when every last drop of patience has finally run out. She stepped away from table 27 and walked toward the center of the room. The crowd parted without being asked. Kendra knelt on the floor, trying to wipe gravy from her burning skin with a napkin that was already soaked. Amahle reached her in 6 steady steps. She crouched, took a clean cloth napkin from a nearby table, and gently pressed it to the worst burns on the girl's forearm. "It's all right," Amahle said softly, loud enough only for Kendra to hear. "I've got you now." Then she stood, helped Kendra to her feet, and kept one arm around the trembling girl as they faced the stage together. The master of ceremonies, a nervous man in a tuxedo, tried to block the microphone. Amahle simply took it from his hand. He did not resist. She turned to the crowd. 400 faces stared back, some horrified, some thrilled for drama, all silent. Mrs. Clark, Amahle said, her voice clear and icy calm, carrying to every corner of the ballroom. You were right about one thing tonight. Class cannot be bought with money, and neither can respect. Josephine opened her mouth to interrupt, but Amahle continued without raising her volume. I am Amahle Foster, founder and sole owner of the Grandeur, the company you hired for this wedding. I signed the contract myself out of respect for my husband. But the secret clauses you added later, the ones that demanded only black and brown staff serve your guests so you could feel authentic upper class, those clauses were never approved by me. They are racist, illegal, and disgusting. A ripple of whispers swept the room. Tonight, Amahle went on, you physically assaulted one of my employees in front of witnesses. That ends now. She looked out over the sea of uniforms. Every server, cook, bartender, and technician had already moved into position along the walls, waiting for her word. Under Clause 14, Section C, Protection of Worker Dignity, Amahle announced, the Grandeur hereby terminates this contract with immediate effect. She snapped her fingers once. 50 employees moved as one. Trays were set down. Aprons came off. Lines formed behind Amahle like soldiers behind their general. Kendra stepped back and joined them, chin high despite the tears. Josephine's face turned purple. You cannot do this. I'll sue you for every penny. Amahle smiled, small and razor sharp. Please do. My lawyers are ready. The head table looked suddenly very small. The bride and groom sat frozen. The lights stayed bright, but the power had already shifted completely. Amahle handed the microphone back to the stunned MC and walked off the stage with her army behind her. She did not look back. Josephine's face lost every trace of color. The woman who had ruled ballrooms for 40 years now looked small and ridiculous under the bright lights. She lunged forward, clutching the edge of the stage as if it could save her. You have no right, she screamed, voice cracking. I'll sue you for breach of contract. I'll ruin you. Security, remove this woman at once. Amahle did not flinch. She looked at Josephine the way a queen looks at a noisy peasant, calm, almost bored. My lawyers will deliver the summons for assault, defamation, and breach of anti-discrimination clauses to your door tomorrow morning, she said, every word crisp and cold. Until then, feel free to serve yourselves. She turned her back on Josephine and gave Danielle one short nod. That was all it took. The withdrawal happened with military precision. Servers lifted untouched platters of beef, salmon, and vegetables and carried them straight back toward the kitchen. Bartenders collected every bottle of vintage champagne and rare Bordeaux. Sound technicians killed the music mid-note. The chandeliers dimmed row by row until only emergency lights glowed faintly. Within 90 seconds, every trace of the grandeur vanished through the service doors. 400 guests sat in sudden semi-darkness, staring at empty tables. Plates held nothing but crumbs from the earlier courses. Glasses stood dry. The sweet smell of roasted meat lingered in the air, mocking the growling stomachs around the room. Someone at table 6 laughed nervously. Another guest muttered, "This can't be real." A woman near the front burst into angry tears because her diabetic husband had not eaten since lunch. Whispers turned into complaints, then into demands. The perfect Clark wedding had become a hunger strike no one had signed up for. Josephine stormed from table to table, promising that food would appear any moment, that it was all a terrible misunderstanding. No one believed her anymore. Phones glowed everywhere as guests texted, recorded, and posted. The hashtag "Josh is starving at the Clarks" began trending before the lights were fully out. Amahle walked down the grand staircase without hurry. Her sapphire gown swept the marble like water. The staff followed in perfect lines, heads high, some still holding rolled-up tablecloths or silver trays. Kendra walked directly behind Amahle, Burns covered now by a clean towel, eyes shining with something close to awe. Weston pushed through the confused crowd and caught his wife at the bottom step. His tie was crooked, his face flushed with wine and shame. Amahle, stop, he begged, voice low and shaking. You've made your point. Can't we fix this quietly? You just destroyed Ethan's wedding. She stopped and looked at him for the first time since the nightmare began. There was no warmth left in her eyes, only exhausted clarity. No, Weston, she said quietly, but every word landed like stone. Your mother's hatred and your silence destroyed it. I only turned off the lights so everyone could finally see what was already rotten. He reached for her arm. She stepped aside so his fingers closed on empty air. I'm going to a hotel tonight, she continued. Tomorrow I will send for my things. When you decide whose side you're really on, you know where to find me. Weston opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Behind him, Josephine's voice rose to a shrill wail as she discovered the catering trucks already pulling away from the loading dock. Guests were standing now, some heading for the exits, others shouting for the bride and groom to do something. Amahle did not wait for more drama. She walked through the front doors into the cool night air. The long line of black vans waited in perfect order. Danielle opened the lead vehicle's door for her. As the door closed and the van rolled down the driveway, Amahle caught one last glimpse of the mansion in the side mirror. The glowing palace looked suddenly cheap and hollow, its windows full of angry silhouettes waving useless fists at the darkness. She leaned her head back against the leather seat and exhaled for the first time in hours. The weight was still there, but it felt different now. Lighter, sharper, hers to carry or drop as she chose. The queen had left the puppet theater and the strings lay cut on the floor. 2 days after the wedding, the entire city seemed to talk about only one thing. Videos taken by guests had spread across every platform. The headline "Starving Wedding of the Year" sat at the top of every gossip site. No one printed the Clark name outright, but everyone in the upper circles knew exactly whose celebration had ended with 400 hungry people eating cold bread in the dark. Amahle sat in her downtown penthouse office, calm as ever. Her phone buzzed with messages of support from clients and strangers alike. The Grandeur's shares dipped for 6 hours, then climbed higher than before once people realized the company had stood up for its workers. She felt proud, but the victory tasted bitter because the man who stayed silent still lived under the same roof she had left. Weston came home that evening to an apartment that felt like a museum. The lights were on, yet the place was empty. Amahle's clothes were gone from the closet. Her perfume no longer lingered in the bathroom. Only a small leather-bound journal remained on the nightstand, the one she wrote in when nightmares woke her at 3 in the morning. He opened it without thinking. Pages of neat handwriting told the story he had refused to hear for 5 years. Dates and short sentences described the insults, the loneliness, the panic attacks after Sunday dinners at his mother turned into trials. A folded medical report slipped out. Diagnosis: chronic anxiety and mild depression caused by prolonged emotional abuse from in-laws. Recommended treatment: distance from source of stress. Weston's name appeared nowhere on the paper, yet he felt it pointed straight at him. He sat on the edge of the bed and read until the words blurred. The memory of Amahle's eyes on the night of the wedding came back sharp and painful. She had looked at him for help one last time, and he had looked away. His phone rang. Josephine's name flashed on the screen. He let it go to voicemail. The message the machine recorded, was pure fury. Weston, you will fix this today. Either you bring that woman to the house on her knees to apologize, or you file for divorce by tomorrow. The family name is more important than your little feelings. He deleted the message and drove to his brother's new house instead. Ethan and Lillian Clark, the bride everyone believed would worship Josephine, lived in a quiet townhouse 20 minutes away. Ethan opened the door looking exhausted. Lillian stood behind him, arms crossed, eyes red from crying. I'm sorry about the wedding, Weston started. Ethan shook his head. Don't be. I'm sorry I didn't stop it sooner. Lillian stepped forward. She held out a small USB drive. I filmed everything that night, she said, voice steady despite the tears. The way she hurt that poor girl with the hot food. The things she said about Amahle. I was too scared to speak up then, but I'm not scared now. Use this. Please. Weston took the drive. His hand shook. Why are you helping? He asked. Lillian looked him straight in the eye. Because I married Ethan, not his mother, and because what Josephine did was evil. Amahle protected every person wearing that uniform. Someone has to protect Amahle now. Weston closed his fist around the drive. For the first time in years, the fog in his head cleared. He saw the truth he had avoided since the day he introduced the woman he loved to the woman who raised him. Love without courage was just another form of betrayal. He hugged his brother and sister-in-law, then walked back to his car. The night air felt colder than usual, but his chest burned. He dialed a number he had never dared call before, the family lawyer. "Draw up separation papers from my parents' trust," he said when the man answered. "I'm done living on their terms." He hung up before the lawyer could argue. Then he sent one text to Amahle. "I was wrong. I see it now. I'm fixing what I broke, even if it cost me everything else." He stared at the screen for a long time. No reply came, but he had not expected one. Some damage could not be repaired with words. It had to be repaired with actions. Weston put the car in drive and headed toward the city. He had a video to deliver and a lifetime of silence to make up for. The hotel ballroom buzzed with reporters and cameras. Josephine Clark stood at the podium in soft pink, eyes red from carefully applied tears. She had chosen the exact shade of lipstick that made her look fragile on television. A large banner behind her read, "Truth and Family Values." "Thank you all for coming," she began, voice trembling just enough. "I have been painted as a monster these past days, but I am simply a mother and grandmother who wanted the perfect wedding for my youngest son. My daughter-in-law, out of jealousy and spite, destroyed that day for everyone. She used her company to humiliate us because she could not accept her place in our family." Cameras flashed. Several journalists nodded sympathetically. Josephine dabbed at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. A side door opened quietly. No one noticed at first. Amahle walked in wearing a tailored black suit, heels clicking once against the marble floor. Behind her came Marcus Reynolds, her lead attorney, a tall black man in his 50s whose reputation for destroying liars in court was legendary. They moved to the front row and sat without a word. Josephine faltered for half a second, then recovered. As if the interruption had never happened, she continued, "This woman has spread vicious lies about racism that simply do not exist. I have never—" Marcus stood. "Mrs. Clark," he called out, voice calm but carrying to every microphone. "Would you like to explain this?" He held up an enlarged copy of the contract addendum with Josephine's signature in bold red ink. The room erupted. Reporters spun in their seats. Phones rose like periscopes. Josephine's mouth opened and closed. "That document is fake. She forged." At that exact moment, the large screen behind her lit up. Lillian's video began to play, crystal clear and unedited. Josephine's elbow driving into Kendra's side, the platter flipping, the hot food hitting the girl's skin, the screams of "savage" and "same breed." Every ugly word rang through the speakers. The room went dead silent. Amahle rose slowly. She did not need to raise her voice. Every camera pointed at her now. "My name is Amahle Foster," she said. "I built the Grandeur from nothing. I signed that wedding contract only because the man I loved asked me to. When I discovered the illegal, racist instructions his mother added behind my back, I terminated the agreement exactly as the law allows. Mrs. Clark assaulted my employee on video. She signed discriminatory clauses on video. There is nothing left to debate." Josephine clutched the podium, face gray. "You ungrateful—" The back doors swung open again. Weston walked down the aisle in a simple navy suit, no tie, eyes fixed on his mother. The room held its breath. Everyone knew the Clark men never disobeyed Josephine in public. He stepped onto the small stage, took the spare microphone from a stunned technician, and faced the crowd. "I have been silent for too long," Weston said, voice steady and clear. "I stood by while my wife suffered years of abuse because I was afraid to lose my family's approval. That fear made me complicit. My mother's actions that night were unforgivable. My wife, Amahle Foster, is the most honest, strongest person I know. I am proud to stand with her today, not against her." He turned to Josephine. "Mother, what you did was wrong. I will not defend it anymore." Josephine stared at her son as if he had slapped her. Her mouth worked soundlessly. Then her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed in a practice faint that fooled no one. Assistants rushed forward, but the cameras stayed on Amahle and Weston. Marcus placed the contract in a flash drive on the table in front of the reporters. "All evidence is here," Lawsuits for discrimination, assault, and defamation have already been filed. Thank you. Amahle gave Weston one long, unreadable look. Not forgiveness, not yet, but acknowledgement that something had finally changed. She turned and walked out, Marcus at her side. Weston followed a moment later, leaving his mother on the floor surrounded by flashing lights. By the time Josephine was helped to a chair, the story had already shifted. Headlines wrote themselves across screens around the world. Clark heir chooses wife over racist mother. Major sponsors pulled out of Clark companies within the hour. Invitations stopped arriving. The empire Josephine spent a lifetime polishing cracked in front of live television. Amahle stepped into the sunlight outside the hotel. Reporters shouted questions, but she kept walking. She had said everything that needed saying. Behind her, Weston watched from the doorway. He did not follow this time. He knew he had only earned the right to begin trying. 6 months had passed since the day the Clark name fell apart on live television. The lawsuits ended exactly as everyone expected. Josephine and the family companies paid tens of millions in penalties for discrimination and labor violations. Old friends stopped calling. Invitations to charity galas never arrived. The grand mansion on the hill went up for sale, too expensive to heat with a ruined reputation. Josephine now lived quietly in a small condominium downtown, telling anyone who still listened that the world had gone mad. Amahle stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her new corner office on the 42nd floor. The city spread out below her like a glittering promise she had kept to herself years ago. The Grandeur had doubled in size since the wedding. New contracts arrived every week from companies that wanted the woman who refused to bow. She wore a simple white blouse and black trousers today, hair pulled back in a sleek knot. The sapphire gown from that night hung preserved in her closet, a reminder rather than a wound. Her assistant knocked once and entered carrying an enormous arrangement of white roses mixed with deep green ferns. The card was handwritten. Amahle opened it and read the familiar handwriting. I am learning how to stand beside you instead of behind you. I took the job at the community center. I moved into my own apartment. I pay my own bills now. When you are ready, I would like to earn the right to try again. No pressure, no rush, just the truth. Weston. She traced the letters with one finger. 6 months ago, the same handwriting had signed documents that cut him off from his parents' money forever. He had started as a program coordinator for at-risk youth, earning less in a year than he once spent on watches. Friends told her he worked late every night and never complained. Amahle placed the card back among the flowers and returned to the window. She felt the old ache in her chest, smaller now, more like a scar than an open cut. Forgiveness was not a gift she owed anyone. Trust had to be rebuilt brick by brick, and Weston finally understood that. Her phone buzzed on the desk. A message from Kendra, the young server from the wedding, now a full-time junior coordinator at the Grandeur, thanks to the scholarship Amahle created for staff who showed courage under fire. Lunch later, boss? My treat this time. Amahle smiled and typed back. Only if you let me pay. Some habits are hard to break. She set the phone down and looked out at the city again. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and rose. Somewhere down there, Weston was learning how to be a man on his own terms. Somewhere else, Josephine sat alone with her bitterness. And here, 42 floors above the streets she once walked with nothing, Amahle Foster stood tall. She did not need a prince to save her. She had never needed one. She had built her own castle, hired her own army, and crowned herself long ago. If Weston ever earned a place beside the throne, it would be because he had become someone worthy of standing next to a queen, not because she lowered her standards to meet him halfway. Amahle picked up one white rose from the arrangement, twirled it once, and let it fall back among the others. Then she turned to her desk, sat down, and opened the next contract, waiting for her signature. The empire was hers. The future was hers. And for the first time in years, her heart felt light enough to enjoy both. She smiled, proud and free, the smile of a woman who had chosen herself and never looked back.